Hi, my name is Chris Hughes, CISO and co-founder at Aquia, and we're here with our second webinar titled Accelerating Your Compliance Journey to FedRAMP Ready and Authorized. And I'm going to kick it over to our moderator, Larry Whiteside.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks, everybody, for everybody joining and who's watching this. This will be a good conversation. So I like to always start off by giving everybody a chance to introduce themselves. I'll start first. I am Larry Whiteside, Jr. I'm the CISO at RegScale, and I'm happy to be here. Anil?
Hey, everyone. Anil Karmel, co-founder and CEO of RegScale. Happy to be here and looking forward to this conversation.
And yeah, Chris, we know who you are.
yeah. Chris Hughes, CISO and co-founder at Aquia. Been in the federal cyberspace almost a couple decades, active duty military and various industry roles, including on the FedRAMP team on the JAB. So happy to be here.
That's great. So we're going to kick this off, right? There's a lot going on in our industry, right, of cyber, but there's a lot in this compliance and what I call the bastard child space of cybersecurity, right? This governance, risk, and compliance space. From your perspective, I'd like both of you to go into what changes do you see that have happened in the compliance, governance, risk, and compliance space here in the last couple of years and its impact on what we're looking at as we move forward. Anil?
Yeah, so I'll kick it off. I mean, the rate of technological advancement has quickly grown over the last decade. And the number of regulations that exist in the market have grown in, almost in lockstep, if not outpacing the pace of technological innovation. Yet we're still doing compliance the same way in these, Word docs and Excel spreadsheets and these monolithic GRC tools in efforts to try and check a box that doesn't really actually accelerate the business or actually keep in pace with the new technology that's coming out there. So there's this inherent cadence mismatch between what technology needs to be delivered and deployed, particularly to serve the government, and the compliance requirements that need to be met to ensure that government agencies can take advantage of these new technologies. And organizations just can't keep up, both on the government side as well as on the commercial side.
Yep. Yeah, I'll tag on to what he hit on a lot of the key themes here. We've seen, obviously the move for DevOps and DevSecOps. We've seen, the distributed workforce and remote work kind of grow and proliferate in the federal space and as well as industry. And, the demand for cloud native services grow exponentially in the federal space. But when we look at how we do compliance, we've seen the push for, like I said, DevSecOps, Kubernetes, APIs, automation, but we're still dealing with spreadsheets and snapshot in time compliance assessments, mailing around these things, emailing around documents manually. It's a very burdensome and cumbersome process, and it simply hasn't kept pace with the acceleration of technology in the way of modern working.
Yeah, no, and I'll agree with both of you. So let's talk about this thing called FedRAMP as it relates to this, right? It's one of the many compliance things out there. And though most people who join this might know what FedRAMP is, I'll make an assumption that some people are just starting that journey. So each of you, give me your perspective of what is FedRAMP and why is it important?
Yeah, so I'll speak from my own personal experience. I spent over a decade at Los Alamos National Lab and having led the team that designed and implemented their cloud and collaboration platforms. The challenge internally within the government is whether it's internal systems or consuming external systems. Before FedRAMP, is you had to create this ATO package, authorization operate package. You had to write all the compliance docs, and I've lived it, Word docs, Excel spreadsheets, as Chris mentioned, that you're emailing back and forth to go capture evidence and document how you're meeting these controls, capture the evidence with the screenshots, put it all together in 600-page Word docs that no one wants to write and no one wants to read, right? But if you don't do it, guess what? You can't use those systems. So FedRAMP was an innovative approach to say, look, let's normalize this assessment process, this ATO process, and say, you know what, if we do it once for the government, that's good for all. As opposed to each agency having to figure out, how am I going to go do these authorization to operate? So innovative program that has really transformed how compliance is done for large organizations by saying, look, if it's good for one, it's good for all of you.
Chris?
Yeah, I mean, as I mentioned, I worked in the federal space for quite a while now, including a stint on the FedRAMP Joint Authorization Board, assessing some of these cloud services coming through. And we've seen the evolution of, cloud first to cloud smart. And, the cloud has played a pivotal role in the federal, digital modernization landscape. And as he points out, the role of FedRAMP is to try to bring that, authorized once, used many kind of paradigm to the federal space when it comes to cloud. This way you don't have, vendors being hit up by many different agencies over and over again for the same information, as well as agencies wasting time, resources, and energy going out and doing these assessments individually over and over again. So FedRAMP brought this paradigm about where you can have this central entity, hosted out of the General Services Administration, that can go out there and do these assessments of these cloud service providers and determine, are these providers suitable to put federal data in these systems, whether we're talking Department of Defense, federal civilian agencies, et cetera, and assess these environments, whether we're talking compliance, security, vulnerability management, things of that nature, and, let people have a level of assurance for putting federal data in these cloud service offerings and help accelerate, federal cloud adoption, basically.
If only private sector can get so aligned, right? So this alignment sounds pretty important, right? Because, with the number of federal agencies, right, if you got hit up by every single one, you'd never stop trying to comply with something. And if they didn't have that alignment, like literally you could be answering a million different questions that are basically asking you the exact same thing over and over and over. So recently there were some changes to FedRAMP, right? What do they mean? And what's the impact going to be on those cloud service providers who are trying to achieve FedRAMP or who are already FedRAMP compliant and must now deal with these new changes?
Well, so I'll kick that off. So, the first big component to the FedRAMP Authorization Act is, if you want to sell into the government, if you want to do business with the government, you must be FedRAMP authorized, right? It's not a choice. It's not or we may be, no, you have to be authorized if you're a cloud service provider. So it's no longer it's you must. The second component of that, which is actually a benefit for those that make the investment to get FedRAMP certified, is a lot of the frustration that cloud service providers were having was, okay, you're FedRAMP certified. Great. You go to an agency and they say, no, that's not good enough. You need to go do this other stuff and go write my own ATO package. And the cloud service provider says, no, I'm FedRAMP certified. Like, I went through the thing. I made the investment. I bought it. So the act actually said, no. Okay, enough of this. If you are FedRAMP authorized, there's a very specific clause in that act that says presumption of adequacy, which means every agency must accept your FedRAMP ATO package. It's not a choice. You must accept it. So now if you make the investment as a cloud service provider to get FedRAMP certified, you can rest assured that ATO will translate to all the other agencies as designed by the FedRAMP program. But that was the initial intent. Now it's codified in law.
Yeah, I mean, and Neil really hits it on the head here, which is, I talked about in the beginning how you can, authorize once, reuse many. That was the impetus and the idea, but it never really played out that way. You had agencies coming to, cloud service providers asking for the information over and over again. And we're talking about getting into a marketplace, for these service providers that's, tens of billions of dollars. So the government's consuming an enormous amount of cloud and using applications like SaaS and so on. But it was duplicative and cumbersome on the cloud service providers and costly, to keep going through this process over and over with agency after agency. So that presumption of adequacy kind of stops that problem out, and it codifies it in the law, as he talked about, as well as it's also, going to bring some additional resources and funding to the FedRAMP PMO to try to accelerate, cloud authorization and adoption, because it can be very time consuming to go through the FedRAMP process due to resource constraints, and they can only assess so many service providers in a given year, for example. So it's bringing additional resources, bringing that presumption of adequacy. And then it's also, the last piece I want to touch on is also introducing the Federal Secure Cloud Advisory Board, which is going to, this group that's going to come in and be made up of federal representatives, but also folks from industry, from cloud service providers, to provide some feedback on how can we improve the FedRAMP process? How can we accelerate timeline for authorization? How can we bring some innovative capabilities to make this process better? So I know we'll be touching on some of those things, but three big things I wanted to point out.
Well, that's great, right? I mean, just the fact that it's now mandatory and now everybody's got to operate underneath that umbrella is great, because we know typically, and the majority of the public's understanding of how the federal government moves is slow. And so it seems like the federal government is, for once, ahead of private sector in, achieving something that's actually going to be very meaningful and powerful. As I think about FedRAMP, right, and I've had many FedRAMP discussions, there are these different levels of FedRAMP. What are as you think about the different levels, what is the importance or lack thereof as it relates to those different levels? And as organizations think about going FedRAMP and getting FedRAMP compliant, what does it mean for them as they think about those different levels that they're trying to plan which one they want to achieve?
Yeah, so there's a couple of components to that. So there's FedRAMP low, FedRAMP moderate, FedRAMP high. So those based on the level of data that you are processing on behalf of the U.S. government as a cloud service provider or a CSP, or a cloud service offering, I should say. You are then going to say, all right, here's the level of data that our cloud service offering is going to host and manage and process. That's ties to the number of controls that you need to go demonstrate compliance against, and the security apparatus and infrastructure and staffing that you need to have as a cloud service offering to support those controls. The other side of that, which is also important, is are you going through a joint authorization board authorization or an agency ATO? So if you're going through a JAB ATO, you can only use JAB certified offerings, right, for those FedRAMP low, moderate, and high packages. You can't just go choose something that's already certified. It has to be a JAB approved offering to go get a JAB ATO. If it's an agency approved authorization, then you can actually use agency approved offerings as you architect the solutions that are supporting your cloud service offering for the government for the level that you're looking to pursue.
Yeah, I mean, that is the key thing to keep in mind. I've seen this play out either in a good way or a bad way. Is a cloud service provider may be coming to FedRAMP and think, oh, we'll just shoot for high. That way we're good and anyone can use us up to the highest level. But the reality is the overwhelming majority of cloud service offerings in the FedRAMP marketplace, tend to fall around moderate. And that's not only for the cloud service providers, but also the consumers on the federal side. They're overwhelmingly using moderate authorized cloud service offerings. And that decision around where you want to go or where you land, obviously is driven by the federal data that's going to be involved in the metadata and so on. But it's also, you have to keep in mind the implications of the decision. When we talk about security controls, the burden, the cost, like Anil talked about with resourcing and staffing and rigor, you want to make sure you make the right decision for the right FedRAMP level. That way you don't incur undue cost. And then you may have, consumers who only need you to be a moderate, but you spent the time, energy, and effort to pursue a high, for example. So it's definitely a critical decision to make sure that you make the right one out the gate to, allocate the appropriate resources.
That's great info, guys. So let's transition a little bit, right? So we're talking about achieving FedRAMP. So once you've achieved it, we've got this aspect of this ATO, and Anil, you brought it up, you mentioned it in your thing. There's this term called CATO or continuous ATO, right? Ongoing continuous monitoring, whatever you want to call it. And from an operations standpoint, we've been doing this aspect of continuous monitoring from a security operations standpoint now for quite some time. But on the compliance front, this is a relatively new area that we're diving into. Help people understand what that means and why it's important that we move towards being continuous in our compliance areas.
Yeah, so from a security standpoint, you hit it. We've spent a lot of time making security real time, making security continuous and complete, effectively shifting left security, right? To try and get security baked into your architecture or your application as soon as humanly possible, right? The challenge is, compliance is a point in time paper-based activity. And it's something that, a lot of people spend time to prepare for the audit. Then the audit happens. It's like patching a pothole, right? On a pothole filled road. And then you just kind of keep going. I think I've seen Chris post on that. So it's like, it doesn't actually show that you're, what you say you're doing from a compliance as imagined doesn't actually meet compliance as implemented. So, the DoD CIO, put out a memo in March of 2022 around what a continuous ATO means in DoD. And it's really around continuous controls monitoring, right? That you're continuously monitoring your controls to get a continuous ATO. So what does that, really in essence mean beyond just this paper-based activity? Well, you've got to bridge the divide between security and compliance to effectively monitor your controls in real time, just like you're monitoring your security in real time. So that way you can keep your paperwork continuously up to date, leveraging the power of APIs and output audit-ready documentation on demand instead of waiting until, okay, here comes the auditors. Let me go get ready and patch the holes, and then they walk away and you never look at the paper again.
Yeah, I like the pothole analogy. I've often been using, like, I'm a father of 4. It's kind of like checking to see if my kid's room is clean. Like, it's good right now, but if I check once a year, no telling how the security hygiene or the cleanliness, for example, in the room example, how it is in between that time. And as we talked about, like, compliance simply hasn't kept pace with the age of DevOps, DevSecOps, automation and APIs and so on. So now we're seeing a shift to. We've always had, continuous monitoring, or ConMon as we've called it. But what we do is we basically, assess 33% of the controls once a year. And then the second year, do another 33% of the controls. But malicious actors don't think in that annual cycle like that. And they don't only target, 33% of your attack surface. They're targeting everything. So we're moving to that more real-time, on-demand, API-driven compliance assessment. As Anil talked about, that's driven by APIs and automation. That way you can have that information on demand at any time you need it, versus just, we'll check once a year, and in between there, we assume you're okay and you're still doing the right things. We trust you. So it's, it's kind of like zero trust. It's lack of an implicit trust. We're actually going out and validating these things in near real time now.
I like it. I love the kids' room analogy. So I have 5 children with my ex, and I've got 2 stepdaughters. So I've got 7, a bundle of 7. And even though most of them are out of the house, the 2 that are still in the house and the 2 that are in college, when they come back, that week or 2 that they're back, it's a tornado. So this aspect of continuous controls, right? So that's got me thinking at a different level, right? Because it's interesting. I've had a number of conversations with CISOs, right, over the years. And when we think compliance, we get mad. And we're like, I hate compliance. But compliance is really controls. But then when we think security and we think controls, we're like, I've got these controls that are important. So what I hear you both saying is that if we just focus on controls and think about that, the same way we think about operational security controls, think about compliance security controls. Do you think that there's an opportunity for the mindset to change around this I call frenemy sort of battle that's happened between compliance and security? Are we at the stage where it's time for that to happen to enable us to really take our organizations to the next phase of security?
I think the time is now, because the regulatory burden is only increasing. And the pace of technological advancement is only increasing. And if we don't make changes now, right, our adversaries aren't waiting to see if we've met a security control. That's just not the way that they think. They're looking for any which way in. So organizations spend an incredible amount of effort and energy to check the box, right? And checkbox compliance and compliance-driven security is not the answer. It needs to be outcome-driven security, where compliance is a byproduct of that, and you get the paper automatically created. You're leveraging the best practices because the regulators had a good intent when they created the regulations. It's just the way that we express how we meet those regulations is the challenge. So if we can effectively bridge the divide between these 2 disciplines that inherently don't necessarily work well together. We've had the security versus compliance debate for decades now. It's like, look, instead of debating the problem, how about we unify them and say, look, let's generate and keep the paperwork continuously up to date. Let's integrate our security tools with our compliance platform. Let's do automated assessments of our compliance controls. When we have an issue, automatically open up a ticket in your ticketing system, ServiceNow, Jira, push a button, out pops your ATO package, and it's always right. right? And it's output in both the Word version that you expect to see it. So if you want to read the 600-page document, bam, here you go. Here's your FedRAMP SSP and your 600-page doc. Oh, wait, we made a change. You want to see it again? Boom, here you go. Here's that 600-page doc, and it changes. You can have as many times as you want. And outputting it in a machine-readable format. So, NIST and FedRAMP partnered to create this fantastic machine-readable language called NIST OSCAL, Open Security Controls Assessment Language, normalizing the representation of controls and assessments in a machine-readable XML and JSON schema. So now you can output the documentation in XML or JSON and have a machine do the hard work and tell you the diffs, as opposed to a human doing a stare and compare exercise across 600 pages and try to figure out, what changed.
Yeah, I mean, that's the reality of the modern, cloud native environments, is that these environments are so complex and nuanced that, we can't manually assess this stuff by hand over and over and keep you up to date in terms of the posture of the environment. And we're moving to, we've seen infrastructure as code, compliance as code. Now we're seeing documentation as code. When we think of OSCAL, as he talked about the effort from FedRAMP and NIST and others that have been involved, and that's taking those compliance artifacts. And I talked about earlier, like how we have a problem of, a bandwidth of assessing and authorizing cloud service offerings, moving to a machine readable format not only improves the experience for the cloud service provider and the system owner, for example, but also for the other end of that, the authorizers, the assessors. That way they can automate some of these activities and review these documents in an automated fashion versus these manual, massive documents that you read it, and by the time you finish reading it, the system state and configuration has changed already by the time you finish reading that document. And then one other point that he brought up that was a good one is, we often hear about, security as a business enabler. The complex compliance landscape is continuing to grow, and it's not getting any easier. So, compliance is actually enabling business when you talk about doing business with the federal government, for example, when you look at things like FedRAMP. So bringing these, technologies to bear to that problem helps you become compliant and secure at the same time, and also open new avenues for business.
I love it. So Anil, you mentioned OSCAL, and I'm going to pull on that a little bit. And I think you defined it well, right, what OSCAL is. But let's talk about or share a little bit right now on its impact on the industry and give us a couple of use cases, right? For people who are new to OSCAL, as you defined it, it sounds great, but what's the overall impact that this is going to have, positive or negative? And because I think it's completely positive, but then also share some use cases and how you've seen it used for the betterment of the industry.
Absolutely. So, first off, kudos to the entire NIST team for embarking on this journey to make compliance a much easier conversation in terms of normalizing compliance as code in a NIST standard. So definitely want to give kudos to both the NIST and FedRAMP team for creating a normalized standard. Because, at the end of the day, the only way we're going to be able to exchange this type of information between systems and accelerate compliance is through a standards-based approach. And OSCAL is exactly that for compliance. So in the vein of like real world applicability, right? To get a FedRAMP authorization is fantastic. The FedRAMP PMO partnered with NIST so that they could accelerate those authorization reviews by accepting OSCAL packages. So if you get a machine readable package, you can parse the machine readable package a lot faster than a human can, right? Number one. Number two, if you've tied your continuous monitoring tools, right, to your compliance platforms and are outputting OSCAL on demand, you can see what those issues are in near real time, as opposed to pumping out 600-page docs that people you can't staff that. You can't hire enough people to go read that paper and try and figure out what actually changed, right? OSCAL makes that easy. So real world applicability, you can now submit OSCAL packages through an OSCAL enabled platform or a tool, right? Build a package in a platform, output it into the FedRAMP PMO, and accelerate your ATO as opposed to, waiting months. So, instead of taking 12, 18, 24 months, you can get it down to 2 to 3.
Yeah, and just to add on to what he's talking about, not only does it add opportunities for acceleration, it also adds opportunities for comprehensibility in terms of scope. Typically, we do sampling. Hey, I'm going to take a subset of the systems and assess them because I can't manually, as a human, review all these things. But if I'm using APIs and automation in RegScale, for example, I can now get a full breadth of coverage of my environment, of my system boundary, for example. And then also, you talked about the frenemies between security and compliance. That's a paradigm that has existed between compliance and engineering for some time too, because you have these assessors, auditors coming to them, asking them a whole bunch of questions about the system, how it's configured, how it's set up. If I'm able to instead interrogate the system, from an automation and API perspective, and I'll put that information into a machine readable format, now I've alleviated that stress, that kind of manual interview style scenario, and I can actually get the information directly from the system, put it in a machine readable format, and then funnel it to the entities that need to review it for compliance authorizations.
I'll add one more thing in the vein of a real world example. One of our own RegScale customers. I won't say the name just yet because it'll be coming out in the next couple of months, but it was going to take them 18 months to upgrade their package from FedRAMP moderate to FedRAMP high, to go, here's all the controls, here's all the things we have to do, right? By leveraging a machine readable format like RegScale and bridging the divide between security and compliance using an API centric platform, took that 18 months to 3, right?
Wow.
Just here's the different controls, boom, RegScale.
Yeah, that's powerful. Like that's powerful within itself. So with that, right, with all these changes, the new compliance rules, the changes in FedRAMP, right, continuous, right, this API-centric model, RegScale, how are CSP cloud service providers dealing with the integration of these things into their tool sets?
So I think, really it comes down to the industry making a concerted effort to make RegScale the core of the platform. It's one of the things we've done at RegScale is, really gone full in on RegScale because we believe it's the future of compliance. Compliance as code is here. Documentation as code, as Chris mentioned, is here. The time is now for us to embrace our machine readable future, being able to pivot between both human and machine readable formats, leveraging a standards-based approach, which RegScale enables you to do, right? So you need an RegScale-enabled tool or platform to be able to produce and generate it, because it was never intended to be a human readable language, right? It wasn't intended for a human to go code RegScale. Machines do what machines do best. Let the machine generate the code and let a machine parse it and analyze it, as opposed to a human having to go write that part of it. So, really it comes down to broad adoption by the community to say, look, this is the way we're going to go implement compliance. We've taken a stance that we believe this is the future. We made a recent acquisition of a company called GovReady, which was a RegScale enabled platform, and implemented their capabilities in our own, and unified our efforts around why we believe RegScale is the future.
Yeah, I think as Anil pointed out, it's going to be a concerted effort between different, entities or personas, I should say, in the ecosystem. Some are going to be cloud service providers. Some are going to be, maybe third-party assessment groups or, assessors who want to make their activities more accurate, easier, more efficient. They're going to rally around this native machine readable format. And then it's also going to be, platform providers like you all and others who are saying, hey, look, there's a better way to do this. It's faster, it's more accurate. And this is the future of aligning with DevOps and the movement of DevOps, for example. And this is the way of the industry is heading in terms of compliance. So I think we're starting to see, the FedRAMP PMO has got around this concept. Obviously, they're working closely with NIST. We have GRC platform providers starting to get around it, 3PAO starting to get around it. And the FedRAMP PMO themselves is now starting to ingest these, formatted documents in these formats. So it's definitely a concerted effort. And then, as you mentioned with government, the great thing is we're seeing industries rally around this. They're very excited about where the future of documentation as code is going. So it's really refreshing to see.
Yeah, and I'll add one more thing, right? I mean, you mentioned 3PAOs, you mentioned FedRAMP. You also need forward-leaning partners, services providers that can help you on that journey, that fully understand the benefits of RegScale and can help you get quickly ready for that ATO. So having those forward-leaning providers like Aquia that understand, hey, this is how you get from zero to FedRAMP very quickly is so important.
I love it. So with that, right, we talk about partnerships. So recently, FedRAMP and the Cloud Security Alliance made a partnership to create FedStar, right? So basically like a certification body, so to speak. How important are those types of partnerships that, right? So we've talked a little bit about the partnerships between the federal space to create these standards, right? But now we're talking about third-party certification that helps you say, am I ready to go FedRAMP, right? And you go through this without actually having to go through the process of FedRAMP, and it gives you that, yeah, you got a certification to do it. So now, oh yeah, I am ready to go do this. How important are those things? And are you seeing other partnerships like that starting to be formed?
I think it's these types of partnerships that are critical to our ability to reduce the yet another framework problem. Right. I mean, every time you look, oh, there's another one. We got to go demonstrate our compliance with this framework and then that framework. And it's like every time you look, another framework pops up. And unless we have a way to normalize and have reciprocity across frameworks, right, we're going to be in this do loop of, continuously having to sit on the scroll wheel and, okay, let's do it for this one. Let's do it for that one. So the beautiful thing about FedStar, this program, is if you've got FedRAMP, there's a presumption of adequacy that you've got CSA star, right? And CSA star is a mapping across multiple standards and frameworks. So this presumption of adequacy language that made it into the FedRAMP Authorization Act, right, is now being leveraged by industry bodies to say, look, if it's good enough for you, it's good enough for us. If it's good enough for us, it should be good enough for all.
Yeah, I think, and when I heard of, you mentioning this program and the direction that Anil took the answer is like, we do have this patchwork quilt of compliance frameworks, and all of us know there's ISO, there's HIPAA, there's HITRUST, there's FedRAMP, there's and on and on and on. And even the National Cyber Strategy talks about, this duplicative, cumbersome framework sprawl we have. So I think this is a forward-leaning effort by, FedRAMP and CSA, Cloud Security Alliance, to have that kind of mutually beneficial program where you can say, hey, FedRAMP is a big investment. It's going to take a lot of time, energy, and effort. We can help you get an understanding if you're prepared to, go down that path from the CSA perspective. And then vice versa, as Anil pointed out, if you're FedRAMP authorized already, now you can get into STAR, for example. That way you don't have to do these activities separately, pay twice, go into it not really knowing whether you're ready, making the financial commitment kind of blindly. So it's definitely a forward-leaning thing. And I think it's really awesome to see the industry do this.
I'm loving this. I'm loving this dialogue. So we've covered a lot of topics here, right? We've covered, the compliance landscape. We talked, about FedRAMP, its changes and its impact. We talked about, ATO, continuous ATO, partnerships, integrating, right? OSCAL, this new language, right, to get this stuff into, to allow machines to do what they do best. For everyone listening here today, right, who hopefully is likely joining because they're trying to understand how to achieve FedRAMP, what it means for them, and depending on where they're at on their journey. If they were to take something away from this today, I want each of you to spend a little time giving them that, hey, this is important. This is that thing that if you heard nothing else, this is a thing that you need to take back to your organization to start moving with. Anil, I'll go to you first.
Yeah, so I'll say this. The public sector is the world's largest customer, right? Specifically the United States government. The US government buys an enormous amount of software. And the US government is really pushing towards adopting cloud and wants to take advantage of the great capabilities that industry has to bear, right? The problem heretofore has been, it's been a tremendous investment to get a FedRAMP certification. A, B, no one was really sure if you got that, could you use it across the entire government? Well, we're here to tell you now, yes, you can. You can use it across the entire government because FedRAMP Authorization Act said so. B, right, if you partner with the right firms to help you get prepared, and you partner with the right ways to get and accelerate your journey, with the right, tech-enabled 3PAOs and whatnot, this is not an 18 to 24-month exercise anymore, right? Because you have machine-readable languages like Haskell that exist out there, right? The path to get from zero to FedRAMP is faster now than it ever has been, right? So don't wait. Start now, because the market opportunity is there. And FedRAMP is looking to accelerate. I think they just hit 400 approved offerings, and that number is just going to continue to accelerate this way as more and more solution providers submit their packages in Haskell. So don't wait. Partner with the right firms to get you ready, and you can actually accelerate your business.
Yeah, from my perspective, I would just reiterate some of what he said, which is the federal government has shown a commitment to adopting cloud native services, consuming applications as a service versus natively building these things or self-hosting cost applications. SaaS is definitely right on their radar as a key path to digital modernization for a lot of their missions and mission owners and so on. And also we've seen a maturity from cloud first to cloud smart, now the FedRAMP Authorization Act. So they're definitely committed to, the cloud native space and FedRAMP. And if you're looking to, get into this space and get into a market that's spending tens of billions of dollars when we think about cloud services and consumption, find the right partners. Like as he talked about, if you're talking about, GRC providers, for example, you want API-centric providers that are using automation, that are using these machine-readable formats. You want service providers who understand the path of the way that compliance is going and can help you accelerate your journey and save you time, money, and effort, and also do so securely, as you said, not having that kind of conflicting relationship between compliance and security, but being secure while also being compliant.
I love it. Gentlemen, I want to thank you both very, very much. Anil Karmel, CEO of RegScale, Chris Hughes, co-founder and CISO of Aquia. I really appreciate you guys taking time today to answer a lot of these questions and really share with our audience all of these things that are, I think, very powerful and very, very important for them and their organization to take back. I am Larry Whiteside, Jr. I want to thank everybody for attending. We look forward to any comments or anything that you want to share. We'll be able to chat about this via LinkedIn and other mediums. Reach out to us all directly if you have questions or thoughts.